Hi, we're back with another episode of Muscle Minute. I'm Justin Harris. This is Brad Hall. And our next step here is we're going to be talking about fueling the fat-burning fire.
Yeah, so what we're looking at is creating the perfect environment for fat loss. And this is in both men and women, or competitors, non-competitors. It kind of all goes hand in hand. But there's really four things that need to be, well, more than that, but four big things that need to be taken into consideration. And some of them are hormonal, and some, well, I think most of what we're going to talk about here, and anything you do, whether it's food intake or anything like that, is going to affect the way your body produces or uses hormones. So the very first thing to consider is keeping estrogen levels low or lower. So we're not talking about dropping them, into an unhealthy state or anything like that. But keeping estrogen in a lower range is going to allow for the body to free up, especially in those hard to get rid of areas.
And that's just fundamental. I mean, from a human sex standpoint, men carry less body fat than women, and that's largely because men have higher androgen levels and lower estrogen levels.
Right. And so the second thing you just mentioned is the higher androgen levels. And so there are different ways to go about that. If you're a natural, obviously these are going to be more manipulated by food and training and getting plenty of rest and some type of supplementation. If you're going the other route, then obviously they can be handled with that pretty easily. So increased androgens, that can come from making sure that you have enough saturated fat, not going overboard, but having enough fat in your diet.
Well, and then it's important to know that that's the way, from a natural perspective, that's the way testosterone is produced. Is cholesterol is actually the precursor for androstenedione, which is a precursor for testosterone.
Yeah, some other decent supplements are vitamin D. People always forget about vitamin D as a hormone precursor also. So the androgens being higher, estrogen being lower, two very key things in creating the best possible fat loss environment. The next thing is low and very stable insulin levels, or stable blood glucose levels. So whether that means that your body's really great at keeping those glucose levels down, the lower and the more steady your insulin levels, the more the body is going to give up oxidized fat in order to use as energy.
And that's very important. And we've covered this before, but on a cell-by-cell basis, when there's insulin receptors in the tissues, when insulin binds to that receptor, that cell cannot oxidize fat for energy. It can only store nutrients.
So there's always going to be some level of insulin floating around, but not if it's lower. There's not going to be enough insulin floating around to every cell in the body.
Well, that's right. On a cell-by-cell, you have billions, trillions of cells in the body.
So that's what he means by cell-by-cell basis. If your insulin levels are chronically high, then that's probably why your body's holding on to it, quite a bit more fat. The last thing is there having receptors available for binding to the catecholamines and the other stimulants and
the beta agonists.
Yeah, the beta agonists, and there's beta 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, and then alpha antagonism also, if you want to go that route.
Yeah, and so these four together are going to create a pretty awesome environment, especially if you're looking to get extra lean. And I'll let you go ahead and
well, the nice thing with that is from a natural perspective, it's almost self-energizing, because as you get lower in body fat, for a male, as they get around between 8 and 12% body fat, they actually produce higher levels of testosterone and lower levels of estrogen. So it's actually almost, self-energizing. As you get leaner, your body is in a better environment to get leaner. Obviously, when you get down to extremely low body fat levels, that changes a little bit. But for the most part, for the average natural person, getting into 8 to 10% body fat is pretty darn lean, and that's actually going to be when you're most effective at getting even leaner. And so we want to go back to we started this whole thing with a calorie is a calorie, and then so now what we have is basically we have these four pillars that Brad just talked about for fat burning, and now we need to maximize what we do with the calories. Like we said, thermodynamics rules, and so if you eat more calories than you burn, you're going to store energy. If you burn more calories than you eat, you're going to release energy. And so what we want to do is maximize the amount of stored energy that's released from fat, not from other sources. And so the way we do that, the most easiest way is you lower carbohydrates, which is why everyone likes a low-carb diet. and that lowers insulin levels, and that it promotes an environment where fatty acids can be oxidized for energy. The problem with that is that it lowers glycogen levels. You eventually get depleted and flat and tired and fatigued, and then you stop having the energy to create a fat burning environment in the gym. But that's what we talked about with hypercaloric diets. When you take in the correct or the right kind of nutrients, like the high carbohydrate days, you replace those glycogen stores instead of storing fat. Another thing we want to do is we probably want to up protein, and that creates a thermic effect of food. Protein, as much as about 20% a really, really high, generous number. 20% of the digestion of protein is actually exothermic. And so what that means is, like we said, most of the protein gets converted to actual carbohydrates, and so that requires energy. So protein comes in as a block of amino acids. Your body has to take those amino acids because most of that isn't going to be used to store new muscle tissue. Your body's going to want to release that as a form of energy, and so it has to do that through glucose. So it takes that amino acids and it converts it to a chain of glucose polymers, which takes energy to do that. It's a real minor amount of energy. Some people get a little too hyped up on the thermic effect of food, in my opinion, but it is a small difference, and every little bit counts when you're trying to get into extremely low body fat levels. And the other thing you want to do is the right kinds of fats, essential fatty acids, and then some specific fatty acids like borage oil that's high in gamma-linolenic acid. This is another small effect, but gamma-linolenic acid actually affects acetylcoenzyme A carboxylase 2, which affects the conversion to melanoCoA, which tells the cell or the mitochondria to release energy, to release. It drives a proton in the mitochondria to release its stores of energy as heat through brown adipose tissue. And again, that's a real minor effect, but things like really major effects come from things like DNP, which operates under that same procedure. That's dangerous and unhealthy. You can create that same environment by eating certain healthy fatty acids.
So one of the just going back to like the ways to lower estrogen, increase androgens, keep insulin levels steady, and create fresh receptors, for the stimulus and catecholamines and things like that. Supplement wise, for lowering estrogen, there's what is it? It's not
XO.
Yeah, well, there's that.
7-keto DHEA.
7-keto DHEA is a great supplement.
6-XO is banned now.
I think it is too. What's the one that's in cruciferous vegetables?
Indole-3-carbinol.
Yeah, but there's another one. I will come back. I will update.
I'll take the chemical warfare approach to this.
Yeah. And then for increasing androgens, again, like you said, being in that 8 to 12% range is gonna for males is going to allow that to happen on its own. For females, also throughout the month, if you know how the female cycle goes, when progesterone is going to be higher, it's a better time of the month for fat loss, believe it or not. And when estrogen is at its highest, is when you see that like the increase in body weight usually that freaks everyone out.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of a just try not to gain area. The low and stable insulin levels, there's the glucose disposal agents, and those work pretty well.
Fenugreek, RALA, ALA.
Yeah, alpha lipoic acid. Those are some cinnamon or cinnulin. What else?
Metformin, if you're going to go the chemical route.
Yeah, and actually metformin is a really cool compound, especially for longevity purposes.
Yeah.
And I think people should definitely look into it if they're, I don't know, over 40. Just in general, they can do some really cool things for longevity. As for the keeping receptors, nice and available for when you want to use fat burners. And fat burners, I mean caffeine or anything that's going to be able to stimulate a beta-adrenergic receptor is cleaning out. So don't use caffeine, every day of the week. Don't use pre-workouts, if you don't need year round.
Don't take ephedrine year round. Don't take Clen year round. Don't take T3 year round. And that's a problem. Not to get off on a tangent, but that's a problem with a lot of coaches of female athletes. Is females have a much narrower band of calories to work with what their basal metabolic rate is and what you get to where you're in a completely starvation diet. They don't have as much room, so it's a lot harder for them to get in shape. And so what a lot of coaches do is just starve them into shape and have them use a ton of amphetamines, ton of stimulants, ton of clen and T3, and then because of a vicious cycle, the rebound after that is a lot of them go back onto it after the contest and then end up taking it year round, and that's not a good cycle to get into because you're creating a new level playing field. Yeah, where I'm taking all these things to maintain off-season conditioning. It's harder and harder to get to pre-contest conditioning.
Yeah.